Tommy the Dock Malone wasn't just another kid from Liverpool's rough streets. He was a teenage hustler who built a cocaine empire out of the city's sprawling docks. But when a shipment vanished and Colombian enforcer Javier Ortega arrived with deadly intentions, Tommy's world spiraled into a dangerous game of betrayal, power and survival that would change Liverpool forever. Tommy Malone was born in 1964 in Bootle, a tough, working-class district in the north end of Liverpool. The air smelled of salt and steel, and the skyline was lined with cranes and cargo ships. This was dockland territory, where the rhythm of life followed the comings and goings of freight from all over the world. Most kids in Bootle dreamed of escaping the grey monotony, but few did. Tommy wasn't like most kids. Even as a boy, he had sharp eyes and a quicker mind than those around him. While his classmates played football in the street, Tommy watched the dockers, studied how deals were made with a nod or handshake, how crates vanished without ever being recorded. Tommy learned early that nothing came free. By the age of 13, he was already earning pocket change running errands for men in the pubs, delivering parcels, making phone calls from payphones, keeping watch outside back doors. No one questioned the quiet kid with the quick feet. When he turned 15, Tommy left school with no qualifications, but a deep understanding of how the world worked, who had power, who didn't, and how to stay 2 steps ahead. He got a job on the docks through his father's connections. Unloading cargo, stacking crates, and cleaning up after older men. The work was hard, the pay poor, but the access was golden. The port was a jungle of sealed containers, uninspected shipments, and overworked supervisors. In the shadows of the warehouses, everything from cigarettes to TVs to foreign whiskey passed hands without ever touching official paperwork. Tommy began slipping items out of shipments, small at first, things that wouldn't be missed. He sold them at street markets and through pub contacts. The profits were modest, but the potential was massive. What fascinated Tommy wasn't the money, it was the system, the holes in it, the way no one watched when everyone was tired, bored, or bribed. By 17, he wasn't just moving stolen goods, he was organizing them. He had dockers on his side, older lads who owed him favors, and even a local copper who turned a blind eye for the right envelope. Tommy Malone had found his playground, and the docks of Liverpool were wide open. In 1983, Tommy Malone was only 19, but he already moved through the docks with the confidence of someone twice his age. The petty thefts had turned into full-scale operations. His network of contacts had grown, and so had his ambition. He wanted more than just selling stolen electronics at car boot sales. He wanted to build something bigger, something that would make him untouchable. That year, he met a man from Manchester who brought hashish in from North Africa via Spain. The man needed someone who could guarantee quiet passage through Liverpool's busy port. Tommy knew the docks like the back of his hand, and more importantly, he knew which hands needed greasing. It started with a single shipment. Hidden inside a container full of ceramic tiles were several kilos of hash wrapped in black plastic. Tommy arranged everything, the paperwork, the timing, the route through customs. He paid a foreman to misplace the container for a few hours. By the time it reappeared, the drugs had vanished, and the container was back on the books, like nothing had happened. The payout was more money than Tommy had ever seen in one go. No risk, no drama, just clean and simple. The operation was a success, and word started spreading. But Tommy wasn't just relying on luck. He studied how international shipping worked, how to create false manifests, how to register dummy companies, and how to use fake names for deliveries. He set up a shell company called Merseyline Textiles, claiming to import cheap fabric from Turkey and India. The real cargo, hidden deep in the containers, was never cloth. With each successful run, Tommy reinvested the profit. He bought a flat in the Georgian Quarter, furnished it with expensive leather, crystal, and chrome. He traded his second-hand Ford for a brand-new Mercedes, and suddenly, he looked the part of a young entrepreneur. His rise didn't go unnoticed. Older gangsters kept an eye on him, unsure if he was a flash in the pan or the real deal. But Tommy kept things professional. No flashy parties, no loose talk. He paid his people well, kept operations tight, and made sure everyone got their cut, and when someone crossed him, they disappeared quietly. By the end of that year, Tommy wasn't just a dock worker running side hustles, he was a smuggler with international links. A businessman with offshore accounts and a name that started to carry weight in places far beyond boot. The boy from the docks had stepped into a new world, one filled with wealth, danger, and secrets. By 1985, Tommy Malone had built a well-oiled smuggling machine, but he knew hashish was limited. The market was flooded. The profits were shrinking, and competition was rising. He needed something bigger, something riskier. That's when he was introduced to a Dutch middleman named Eric van Dalen in Amsterdam, a man known for connecting European smugglers to South American suppliers. Through Eric, Tommy was introduced to Colombian traffickers looking for a discreet route into the UK. Most of the heat was focused on London and the south coast. Liverpool, with its aging docks and overlooked cargo inspections, was ideal. Tommy wasted no time. He used his shell company, Merseyline Textiles, to begin importing shipping containers from Colombia, with cocaine bricks hidden deep inside bolts of cheap fabric. Each container was packed with care. The cocaine was vacuum-sealed, wrapped in plastic, and layered between legitimate goods. Everything appeared normal on the surface, even down to the shipping documents. His people on the inside ensured that the containers moved through customs without delay. In return, they received quiet payments, cash stuffed into glove compartments, handed over in pub toilets, or left in lockers at local gyms. The first shipment brought in nearly 100 kilos of high-grade cocaine. It hit the streets within days, chopped up and distributed by smaller crews who paid Tommy a cut. The profits were astronomical. In a single run, he made more than he'd earned in a year moving hash, and the demand kept growing. Cocaine was becoming the new drug of choice, glamorous, addictive, and expensive. Everyone wanted a taste, from nightclub owners to city bankers, and Tommy was happy to supply. He expanded his crew, bringing in trusted friends and loyal ex-cons. He hired muscle to protect shipments, drivers to move product across the country, and cleaners to deal with problems before they became threats. Money flowed like water, laundered through arcades, betting shops, and fake construction firms. With every successful run, Tommy's empire grew stronger. But success brought risk. The Colombians watched closely. They expected precision, discipline, and profit. One mistake could mean a bullet in the back of the head. Tommy understood the game. He moved like a man who knew his time could be limited. No names over the phone, no handshakes without gloves, no second chances. Liverpool had a new king in the shadows, and his throne was built on white powder. As Tommy Malone's operation expanded, so did the interest from people who wanted a piece of it, or wanted to tear it down. Word spread fast through the criminal underworld that a young man in Liverpool was running Colombian product through the docks, with near-perfect precision. For a while Tommy stayed untouchable. His connections on the ground, his airtight shipping methods, and his discipline kept his name just out of reach from law enforcement. But power like his never goes unnoticed for long. Rival crews, particularly one from Manchester known for their brutality, began sniffing around the Mersey. The first sign of trouble came when one of Tommy's containers was delayed at Birkenhead docks. It was meant to pass through with no issues, but when his men arrived, the container was gone. It turned up 2 days later, and someone had intercepted the shipment, stripped it clean, and left just enough behind to send a message. Tommy didn't panic, but he didn't ignore it either. He doubled security at the port, replaced several dock workers he no longer trusted, and made quiet inquiries about who was bold enough to make a move on his turf. The answer came quickly. The Manchester crew, led by a man called Craigie Barnes, had been expanding into Merseyside. They weren't subtle. 2 of Tommy's street-level dealers were found dead in a derelict building in Speke, hands bound, shot execution style. No robbery, no warning, just bodies. It was a challenge, direct and unmistakable. Tommy responded in silence. He had always believed in quiet power. A week later, Craigie's younger brother's car exploded outside a nightclub in Salford. No arrests. No suspects. Just smoke and twisted metal. It didn't end the war, but it sent a message. Liverpool wasn't open for business. Still, the violence had consequences. Police pressure intensified. Surveillance teams began watching the docks, and customs officials were put under review. Even worse, the Colombians were watching from a distance. They didn't care about local rivalries, they cared about consistency, profit, and control. Any hint that Tommy was losing his grip could put him in danger. Tommy knew he had to walk a thin line. He couldn't afford to appear weak, but drawing more blood would only bring more heat. Behind closed doors, he began tightening his circle. Loose ends were cut. Phones were burned. For the first time, Tommy started to question whether his empire was growing too fast for him to hold. With the money pouring in faster than ever, Tommy Malone began to shift from streetwise smuggler to high-end businessman, or at least the image of one. The cocaine trade had made him rich beyond anything he'd imagined growing up in Bootle. He was no longer counting cash in the back rooms of pubs. Now he had offshore bank accounts, a personal driver and lawyers on retainer. He bought a townhouse in Eichberth with marble floors and imported Italian furniture. Every detail of his new life was designed to distance himself from the streets. But the streets were never far behind. Tommy opened 2 restaurants and a nightclub in the city center, all legitimate on paper, but each one served a different purpose: fronts for laundering money. Fake receipts, inflated staff costs, and bogus suppliers kept the books looking clean. It worked for a while, but the more he invested in appearances, the more careless he became behind the scenes. He stopped attending key meetings with his dockside crew. He put too much trust in middlemen, assuming their loyalty was guaranteed, and worst of all, he started letting greed steer his decision. In early 1986, Tommy tried to fast-track a new shipping route through Cork, Ireland, to expand his reach across the Irish Sea. The deal was rushed, the partners unfamiliar. It backfired. The customs inspection in Cork uncovered a poorly concealed load, and 2 of his Irish drivers were arrested. One of them flipped within 48 hours. Though nothing pointed directly at Tommy, the leak was too close for comfort. He tightened security again, but cracks were beginning to show. His crew started whispering that he was losing focus. His presence on the streets had vanished. He spent more time in private clubs with city lawyers and shady businessmen than with the people who built his empire. Some feared he'd gone soft. Others feared he was simply stretched too thin. Then came the worst betrayal. His trusted accountant, a man who had managed Tommy's finances since the early days, vanished overnight. So did over £400,000. It was a blow that rocked the organization. There were no signs, no warnings, just an empty office and a frozen bank account in Jersey. Tommy sent men across the UK and into Europe looking for him, but the trail went cold. For the first time, Tommy wasn't in control. Mistakes were catching up. People were talking, and in the world he operated in, too much noise always brought danger. In late 1986, everything changed. A container, scheduled to arrive from Cartagena through a stop in Lisbon, reached the port of Liverpool right on time. On paper, it was another routine shipment, bolts of synthetic fabric destined for a warehouse in Toxteth. But when Tommy's crew opened it, expecting to find over 100 kilos of high-grade cocaine sealed and hidden inside, the container was empty. Not a single brick remained. No signs of forced entry was empty. Not a single brick remained. No signs of forced entry, no tampered seals, no obvious clues. It was as if the drugs had never been there at all. The missing shipment represented a loss of over £5 million. But the real problem wasn't the money, it is what the loss represented. In Tommy's world, reliability was everything. He had built his reputation on consistency, discretion, and Now the Colombians were watching closely, and they were not known for patience or forgiveness. Within hours of the discovery, word was sent up the chain. Tommy knew what came next wouldn't be a polite phone call. There would be consequences. Panicked but composed on the surface, Tommy began an internal investigation. He interrogated his own crew, rotated passwords, checked every point of contact from Lisbon to Liverpool. Nobody confessed. No one admitted to seeing anything suspicious, yet the loss was too specific, too clean to be random. It wasn't a mistake. It was theft, and it had to be someone on the inside. He ordered 2 of his longtime associates to be taken off the street and questioned. Neither came back. Whether they were guilty or not didn't matter. Tommy needed to show strength, to reassure his backers that he was still in control. But even as he made those moves, doubt crept in. The missing container had passed through multiple hands. Was it stolen in transit, intercepted by rivals? Or worse, was someone within his closest circle playing both sides? The paranoia started eating at him. He stopped using the same meeting spots. He switched vehicles twice a day. He began sleeping in different apartments across the city. Those around him noticed the shift. Tommy, once composed and ruthless, was growing erratic and distrustful. But the most chilling development came days later, when a coded message arrived from Amsterdam. A name was mentioned, Javier Ortega. No details, no explanations, just a warning. The Colombians weren't just asking questions anymore. They were sending someone to find answers, and Tommy knew exactly what that meant. The rules were about to change. A few weeks after the shipment disappeared, a man named Javier Ortega stepped off a ferry into Liverpool. Tall, cold-eyed, and speaking flawless English with a clipped accent. Ortega was no ordinary visitor. Rumors quickly spread that he was an enforcer for one of Colombia's most feared drug cartels. A man sent not just to investigate the missing shipment, but to impose order and discipline. His reputation preceded him, ruthless, efficient, and utterly loyal to the cartel's interests. Ortega wasted no time, inserting himself into Tommy Malone's world. He showed up at meetings unannounced, watched silently from the sidelines, and asked questions no one wanted to answer. He didn't rely on charm or threats. His presence alone was enough to make men uneasy. Those close to Tommy found themselves being interviewed in hushed tones, pressured to reveal details about shipments, finances, and loyalties. The message was clear. Loyalty to Tommy was no longer enough. Ortega answered to a higher authority. Within weeks, bodies began to surface. One by one, Tommy's trusted lieutenants were found dead in brutal ways, dumped in canals, left in alleyways, or strangled and discarded near the docks. The killings weren't just executions, they were warnings. Ortega made sure that everyone knew the price of failure or betrayal. Rumors whispered that Ortega personally carried out some of the murders, his cold efficiency terrifying even hardened criminals. Tommy felt the walls closing in. His empire, once secure behind layers of deception and loyalty, was now under the watchful eye of a foreign enforcer, who answered only to the cartel. His men were scared, some considered turning informer, others disappeared without explanation. Tommy himself had to navigate a dangerous game of trust and survival. Every phone call, every meeting felt like a trap. Despite the fear, Tommy refused to back down. He tightened security, changed routines, and started using coded messages. But deep down, he knew the rules had shifted. The Colombians weren't interested in partnerships. They wanted control, and Ortega was their iron fist in Liverpool. Tommy's rise, built on smarts and street savvy, was now being challenged by a force that didn't care about loyalty or local ties. The docks, once his kingdom, had become a cage. With each murder and interrogation, the line between ally and enemy blurred. In this new world, Tommy would have to decide who he could trust, if anyone at all. As Javier Ortega's grip on the Liverpool operation tightened, Tommy Malone's world began to unravel in ways he never expected. The pressure was relentless. Ortega demanded full control and absolute loyalty, and those who hesitated faced deadly consequences. But the hardest blow came when Tommy uncovered a betrayal so deep it threatened to destroy everything he had built. Tommy's right-hand man, Callum Dyer, had been with him since the early days on the docks. Loyal, dependable, and ruthless when needed. Callum was more than a friend, he was family. But behind closed doors, Callum was playing a dangerous game. Unbeknownst to Tommy, Callum had been secretly meeting with Ortega, promising the Colombians greater profits in exchange for power. The missing shipment had been Callum's idea, a deliberate act to weaken Tommy's position and demonstrate his own value to the cartel. The discovery came late one night. Tommy found evidence hidden in Callum's desk, a series of coded messages, payment records and contacts that connected directly to Ortega. It was proof that the man he trusted most had been working against him all along. The betrayal cut deep. It wasn't just about the money, it was about survival and power. Callum had gambled everything to become the new kingpin under the cartel's control. Faced with this reality, Tommy had to act fast. Killing Callum outright risked provoking Ortega's wrath. Instead, Tommy pretended to accept the new order, announcing a staged handover of leadership. Publicly, he stepped back, appearing to concede control while secretly planning his next moves. Behind the scenes, he liquidated assets, arranged for safe houses, and contacted trusted associates to prepare an escape. Trust became a rare commodity. Tommy isolated himself, questioning every friend and ally. He knew any one of them could be the next traitor. Paranoia set in, making every phone call and meeting feel like a trap. The man who once commanded respect was now a hunted figure, forced to play a dangerous game of deception. As Ortega tightened his hold and Callum grew bolder, Tommy realized his empire was crumbling. The docks that had once been his playground were now battlegrounds. The choices ahead were stark: fight a losing war, flee and disappear, or risk everything on one last desperate move. For Tommy Malone, the Scouse Godfather, the next chapter would define his legacy, for better or worse. Tommy Malone's staged retreat was only the beginning of a desperate fight for survival. With Callum now openly aligned with Javier Ortega, Tommy found himself outnumbered and outgunned. The cartel's men controlled the docks, the shipments, and most of his old crew. Everywhere he looked, allies had turned into enemies or disappeared entirely. Yet Tommy refused to give up. His survival depended on striking back and fast. Knowing he couldn't face Ortega and Callum head-on, Tommy turned to an old ally outside the drug trade, a seasoned smuggler named Ronnie Sparks Jenkins. Sparks had connections in the local black market and a reputation for getting goods through impossible situations. Together, they devised a plan to cut off Ortega's supply chain by intercepting a major shipment before it reached Liverpool. It was a risky move, but if successful, it could cripple the cartel's grip on the city and send a message that Tommy was still in charge. The operation required precise timing and trusted hands. Tommy recruited a small group of loyalists, willing to risk everything for him. They tracked the shipment, a container arriving from Colombia hidden among innocent goods, and prepared to hijack it before Ortega's men could secure it. The night of the interception was tense, with every moment fraught with danger. The docks were crawling with armed guards, surveillance cameras and cartel lookouts. Against all odds, Tommy's team succeeded. They seized the shipment and spirited it away to a secret location. The haul was worth millions and would provide enough leverage to negotiate with the Colombians. For a brief moment, it seemed Tommy had turned the tide. But victory came at a cost. The cartel retaliated quickly and brutally. One of Tommy's trusted men was found dead in a deserted warehouse, tortured and left as a warning. Police presence increased, and informants whispered in the shadows. Tommy's enemies closed in from all sides. Despite the setbacks, Tommy pressed on, reaching out to contacts in London and Manchester, seeking new alliances. His world had shrunk to a dangerous game of chess, where every move could be his last. The city's underworld watched closely, waiting to see if the boy from Bootle could reclaim his throne, or if his empire would crumble into history. In the end, Tommy Malone's fight was more than about drugs or money. It was a battle for survival, respect and control over a city that had raised him. The stakes had never been higher. The final chapter of Tommy Malone's story unfolded in the cold, grey dawn of a Liverpool morning in 1987. The power struggle between him, Callum Dyer, and Javier Ortega had reached a deadly climax. The docks, once bustling with the sounds of cranes and cargo, now echoed with tension and suspicion. The city held its breath as the Scouse Godfather's empire teetered on the edge of collapse. Tommy knew the time had come to make a choice. Continuing the fight would mean more bloodshed and possibly his own death. Disappearing wasn't easy. He was marked by the cartel and betrayed by those closest to him. Staying meant risking everything he had built, including his life. He made plans to vanish, arranging safe passage through contacts in Ireland and setting up a new identity overseas. But before he could leave, a final betrayal struck. One of his few remaining loyal men turned informant, giving the police enough evidence to arrest Tommy on drug trafficking and conspiracy charges. The arrest was swift and public. The media seized on the story. The rise and fall of Liverpool's most notorious drug lord, the boy from the docks who had dared to build an empire of cocaine and fear. Inside the courtroom, Tommy's reputation preceded him. Prosecutors painted a picture of a ruthless mastermind, controlling every aspect of the drug trade in the city. Witnesses spoke of violence, intimidation, and betrayal. Yet despite the overwhelming evidence, there was a strange sympathy for the young man who had climbed so high from humble beginnings. Tommy Malone was sentenced to a long prison term, but his legacy lived on. In Liverpool's underworld, his name still carried weight, both as a warning and a legend. Some saw him as a cautionary tale about ambition and betrayal. Others remembered him as a man who played the game harder and smarter than most. Years later, whispers circulated that Tommy had made peace with his past, working quietly to rebuild his life, far from the docks. The empire he built was gone, but the story of the Scouse Godfather remained. An unforgettable chapter in the history of Liverpool's crime world, where loyalty was fragile, power was fleeting, and trust was the most dangerous currency of all.